In this video we're going to be looking at some of the different ways that we can measure economic growth. So we're not talking about the production, income and expenditure approach, we're just talking about different ways the ABS calculate economic growth and compare it to the previous period. So economic growth, we've talked about, occurs when there is an increase in the real value of finished goods and services produced in Australia from one year to the next. Two good terms to use: real value, not volume, and finished goods. They're generally prepared every single quarter, every 3 months, and they can be prepared using the income, expenditure or production approach. They all should be fairly similar. Real GDP is reported by the ABS on a quarterly basis. They're using the chain volume GDP, but they generally use what we call seasonally adjusted figures. So what I mean by that is, there is increased spending in some periods above others. So there is generally more spending in the economy in, for example, the months October, November, December than July, August, September, and that's because of Christmas shopping. There's a lot more retail spending, a lot more consumption expenditure in that month. But what they basically do, if they want to compare growth from September to December, they want to take out the impacts of the extra retail spending caused by shopping, Christmas shopping. So they basically take out that impact and then work out whether the overall strength of growth is improved from September to December. And that gives us an underlying rate of growth. That's what we mean by seasonally adjusted, taking out the impacts of seasons. There's different ways to measure economic growth. The first one is what we call the annual rate of economic growth, or the year-on-year growth rate. And what we do to calculate that is we compare the GDP figures from this period this year to this period last year. So we use by calculating the real GDP dollar values for the last quarter and compare them to the values for the quarter 1 year earlier. So for example, if total production was 358,483 million in the September quarter 2013. So in July, August and September of 2013 we produced this much. If in 2014 we produced 369,494 million, to work out the annual rate of economic growth, we're comparing this year's quarter to last year's quarter. So what we will do is this year minus last year's quarter divided by last year's quarter, and then times it by 100. So pretty simple maths, just take this year's quarter's figures, minus by last year and divide by this year. And that gives an indication of how much stronger growth is this year in real terms compared to last year. In this case, it's 3.1%. So for example, the latest annual economic growth rate reported was 2.7%. This means that the total real value of production, excluding inflation, over the 3 months October, November, December of 2013 is 2.7% higher than it was in October, November, December 2012. So for example, say it was 100 in 2012, now it would be 102.7. And we'll put it in billions because it makes more sense. So that's what it means by the annual growth rate. Compare to the same period last year. And that's generally how we calculate economic growth. The annualized growth rate is very different. Okay, what they do to calculate the annualized growth rate is they do it for a quarter and then they times it by 4. So if GDP rises from 677,772 to 369,595, that's higher, yep, it's increased 0.5%. So if we were to do this figure here, minus this figure here, divided by this figure here again, we would get 0.5%. To work out our annualized growth rate, we just times that by 4. So if, for example, we had 0.5% growth from the September to the June quarter, our annualized growth rate would be 2%. So we work out growth for the quarter. So, for example, if we were doing it for the December quarter, we'd minus what growth was in the September quarter of the same year, so 3 months earlier, and then just times that by 4. Okay. It's very effective at isolating volatility during a particular period, because if a period is excessively volatile, that period is going to get times by 4 to get our annualized growth rate. So for example, if say growth fell by 2% from the March quarter to the June quarter, once we times that by 4, we would say that our negative economic growth for that year was 8%. So if it's a big impact in one quarter, it's going to have a massive impact on our GDP figures. So annual growth rate compared to last year, annualized growth rate, get it for the quarter, then times it by 4. So here's basically how to go about a question. Explain the difference between the annual growth rate and the annualized growth rate to calculate economic growth. Well, the annualized growth rate calculates the figure for growth in a particular quarter and then times its value by 4 to work out the growth for the year. This is different to the annual rate of economic growth in that it measures the The annual rate of economic growth measures the year-on-year growth rate by calculating real GDP dollar values for the latest quarter and comparing them to the values for the same quarter 1 year earlier. So comparing April, May and June of this 2014 to April, May and June of 2013. So when you see the annual growth rates come out for January to March in a couple of weeks, that would be compared to January to March in 2015 for this year. So for example, they would compare the March quarter 2015 to March quarter 2014 to compare growth. So one does it for the quarter, then times it by 4. This one compares it to the same quarter last year. That's all.